is Ruthie Scheid. I'm an intern at PlatteForum's ArtLab for Teens, and this episode is going to be about world issues that we see faced every day, and also about our upcoming show. Our show is titled Listen to Our Cries, and it's going to be on March 4th at 2700 Arapahoe St at Savoy at Curtis Park.
My name is Attica Williams, and this segment is going to be Ruthie talking about gun control and why we think it's important and why we're going to feature it in our show.
Yeah, so gun control is posing as a major issue in society right now, especially a lot of teens are kind of noticing this, and I think that's a big part of why we chose to incorporate it into our show, because it's something that we face honestly every day. Learning about children going through drills of how to react if there's a school shooter, and reading in the headlines about a bunch of teens who have been murdered in their halls of their high school, and wondering if every day when we go to school, if that day is going to be our last day walking those halls. That's something that has been really heavy on a lot of us, and a way to channel that is through art for sure. And I think our goal is to just make people uncomfortable and make people see that and understand that this is something that us as 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds are going through, that we shouldn't have to be facing and dealing with. And it's something that has touched mothers and families and children, and it's just really, really important. And I think that there's a kind of a theme that we see in our society of just kind of brushing it off and telling people that they have our thoughts and prayers and best wishes for the families who've been affected by this, but not really making any detrimental change. And I think that's what we all want to see. Change that we're wanting to see is just information and people wanting to become a part of these things that are going on and striving to donate to their communities and organizations that are actively helping with this, and just educating themselves on these issues, because in order to do that, we have to spark and plant this little bug inside of their brain that is making them think about it and want to go home and research more about it for sure.
I want the change to be acknowledgement, because I feel like shootings and gun violence is just really normalized recently, or I guess it really has always been. And kind of like what Ruthie said, I just really, especially in my art piece, I really want to make parents who always complain about their kids feeling unsafe at school, that they can see some of these pieces and understand what their kids are going through. And again, like Ruthie said, to make them feel uncomfortable and in our shoes. And I think that maybe because they're older, they might be able to vote to put some of those things, or to stop some gun violence.
Kind of adding on to that, I do think it's difficult when a lot of us aren't young enough to vote, and we feel like it's our responsibility to educate people who are old enough to vote on these issues. And I think that that's also a really important part of this art show, is just kind of urging people to vote on these issues and take action because they can.
Ruthie, how do you feel like you are conveying this message of gun violence or anything that you just talked about in your art, and how you feel like you're illustrating it to other people?
Yeah, so I can start by just kind of talking about what my art piece is going to look like. It's still in kind of the idea phase, so some of this could be subject to change. But so far, I'm just working on kind of a smaller canvas, and I have just a girl with a bullet wound in her head and a halo over her. And in the background, I'm going to include a lot of news lines and headlines and just things that people have been saying about gun violence that kind of contradict themselves, and just to kind of show it all centers around just the victims, and that's the most important part of this, especially when there's a lot of just random things being said in the media that don't really matter. And I think that my goal with that is to, like I said, just bring attention to what we are going through and what we are facing, especially all of these teenagers who have lost their lives due to gun violence, and focusing on that, like I'm going to include probably some college brochures kind of like pasted around, because these were people who were supposed to have a future and they got that taken away from them just because someone was having a quote unquote bad day. And that's like what I want my artwork to be about, and I want it to kind of be about that heavy topic.
So that marks the end of the gun control segment with Ruthie. And now we're going to move on to the climate change segment with Patrick.
Hello, I'm Patrick Pettybridge, and I am an ArtLab intern working on the climate change portion of Listen to Our Cries.
Patrick, how do you feel like you're illustrating climate change and the need for climate change and just change in general in your art, and how do you see that in other people's art too?
So, climate change, as I see it, has become a major threat to our generation because our governments are failing to act upon it with necessary and meaningful change. So, our art is mainly about representing that lack of action at the national and state level.
How do you want the audience to interpret your work, and what do you want them to get out of your work?
I think we want them to be inspired by the voices of our youth today. There are lots of environmental justice organizations working nationwide to bring about meaningful change to combat this global crisis. And I think that our art is working side by side with those messages.
How do you feel like the reaction of people who view your art will help climate change, or like will contribute to the climate change movement?
It will give them ideas of how they can create change in their home and how they can voice their opinions on how climate change is affecting them and their community out on the streets.
What is your view on climate change, and what inspired you to make art and to talk about climate change? Like what's driving you?
What's driving me towards making art about climate change is I don't want to live in a world that is stricken by famine and drought and extreme weather and rising oceans and a whole bunch of other negative, bad effects that will impact my adulthood.
My view is that I think it's honestly irresponsible of people now to just not honestly give a crap about climate change, and they're just leaving it. Honestly, I see it as selfish how they're going to leave it for the next generation to just deal with it. And a lot of these things are like really reversible, like taking away power from big corporations that are like polluting the earth. And like no matter how much people try and recycle, it's nothing compared to the huge corporations that are like completely just destroying the earth. And I think it all stems from like honestly kind of capitalism. And I just think just the greed for money and the greed for success and is just ruining the chance of like the future generations to have a good life where they're not going to be where they're not going to have good air, where there's going to be floods, there's going to be earthquakes, there's going to be trash everywhere. Like I saw this thing like 3 months ago where it's like the average person every single year eats like 3 credit cards worth of plastic, like from just like everything, like seafood, just random things. And it's just really concerning, all because of people's just greed. Can you go in depth into one of your artworks and speak about how you're illustrating climate change and how you want other people to react to that and how you want it to be seen as and what change you want to affect?
One of the major pieces of art for climate change is remodeling a recycling bin into the shape of the earth. So we use things like wires and cheesecloth and paper mache to make a visual representation of the earth while also giving guests the opportunity to dispose of their waste during the show. And I think that will be able to call attention to the problem of waste and its contribution to climate change. And that will inspire people to maybe rethink how they dispose of waste at home.
I think that even the use of the art piece too really, because like everything you're using, like the bin, like technically using it again is recycling, so it's really
We're recycling a recycling bin.
good. That was the end of the climate change segment with Patrick, and now we'll be doing the identity segment with David.
Yeah, so I'm David Grajeda Gonzalez, and I'm also an intern at PlatteForum's ArtLab. And I kind of want to talk about identity and also just how overlooked it has been in the past. Mainly because I guess there's been a stigma around therapy for a long time, and I find it's finally being addressed, but there's still a big problem among teens with mental health and how it's driving many people to just really bad points in their life. And I just feel the need that it is really important to be addressed.
What is your personal drive for wanting to do identity? Like what is really important about identity that you think needs to be shared?
Well, what drive me to focus on identity for this exhibition, was that I've really struggled with that in the past and kind of coming to terms with who I am and coming to terms with kind of labeling myself and also accepting that not everything needs to be labeled. And I think that's why I really connect with identity. I just really want to express myself through artwork and challenge myself to identify with my identity, if that makes sense.
Um, how do you plan on illustrating your, like you were saying, like the whole labeling yourself thing and being your true self in your art? And how do you feel like you're representing that to others?
Yeah, so for the exhibition, I'm actually planning two pieces, and one that really focuses on labels, I feel, is my self portrait that I'm doing in colored pencil, and it's kind of touching upon the self destructive nature that comes with labeling yourself. As I'll depict myself kind of as a statue with my face really zoomed in, kind of giving an uncomfortable view to the audience, kind of personal view, and I'll really just focus on kind of giving myself elements of cracked glass to see how I'm shaping myself and how at the same time it's kind of destroying myself, because with labeling myself, it's really been a hard journey, and I've noticed that with other people also.
You were talking about this self-destruction part. How have you noticed that in other people, and what do you want those people when they see your art? How do you want them to react to this and knowing that they're not alone?
I know with self destruction that comes by many different forms, and obviously, an extreme form is self harm. I feel when identities are overlooked and mental health is just ignored, people are pushed to points where the only escape they could feel from kind of holding everything in is self harm. And I want to provide kind of a release of that with my art. I want people to know that they're not alone. And although older generations have kind of left us in this situation where we kind of have to figure everything out ourselves, that we still have each other as we're still the same generation. I've also seen with my peers that for my a second piece that I haven't talked about yet, we're gonna focus on the body and kind of how we're perceived and how we think we should be perceived. So I'm focusing on making a head sculpture, as faces are really important with me. I focus a lot on portraiture, and I think you could tell a lot by looking at someone's face and it's really expressive, which is what I like about captivating faces. And so with me doing a face, I know other people in the same group as me are also doing other parts of the body, such as the torso, and focusing on gender with a more traditionally masculine side compared to a more feminine side, and just battles with gender and self-expression. And also another one with a heart, leg, really just different parts of the body. Attica, I also know that you're in the same group as me in identity, so I wanted to know what you were doing and so you could also talk a little bit about your piece.
Y'all ready to get sad? um, so my piece is mostly about I'm doing two pieces for identity. I'm doing one on gender or like gender identity. I grew up in a very strict, traditionally Catholic house. And, growing up, I always knew that I wasn't cis. So having those problems and my family just not really getting it was rough. And then going to school and then having classes that were telling me if you feel this way, you're going to hell. Or if you're a woman, you have to have kids or you're worthless.
Yeah, I do believe identity comes with a bunch of different parts. Originally, for our exhibition, we were going to focus on LGBTQ issues, but we realized that that's part of an identity. There's a bunch of other factors that come into that. There's race, there's backgrounds, there's economic situations. So it's kind of just focusing on the intersectionality of everything come together and just battles that come with sexual orientation, gender, and mental health.
Yeah. For my first piece, I did it was originally it was supposed to be a jar that got smashed open, but that didn't work. I ended up making a mess in my garage. But it ended up being a lantern as because bullying can really affect how you identify yourself and how you show your identity to the world. So I wanted to show that a part of me wanted to hide who I truly am, and the other part of me really wanted to be who I truly am. So like the outside is really of the lantern thing that's really specific. The lantern thing is very bland, and then the inside is decorated with a bunch of crazy colors. Like there's like a Mexican flag because I was too scared to tell my white friends that I was Mexican, or my Mexican friends that I was Mexican. And then there's like an American flag because I was too scared to tell my Mexican friends that I was white because I was afraid of not being Mexican enough. There's an LGBTQ flag because I identify myself as LGBTQ. And there's a bunch of family photos in there that I feel like even though some of those photos are from a rough part of my life, they're still a part of my identity. And I feel like that's like those experiences have shaped me into the person I am today. So I feel like showing all parts, the good and the bad, is very important.
Yeah, what I want and what we want for the audience to take from our pieces is just to get a deeper and uncomfortable insight into just how we're dealing with our mental health, and with many of us not affording therapy as that's a privilege for many, how we're using art as a coping mechanism to express those views and come to terms with our identities. For people that feel indifferent or just don't see the need to talk about identity, I would just try to express to them that although maybe they are in a comfortable situation in their life where whoever they are is widely accepted, there's many other people who have to grow up battling who they are and try to conform with what the norms are at the time. So same thing with privilege. If you don't see the need to talk about identity, you're just unknown to what privilege you have, and you should really try to understand that not everyone can afford that, and it's really affecting a lot of people in a way that can drive them to suicide, and it's something that shouldn't be overlooked to save lives.
Kids are really having trouble figuring out how to live with themselves a lot of the time. These are very trying times we are going through with this whole pandemic and this whole decade of massive change. We need to think beyond what we have previously thought to make sure that our youth can grow up to be physically safe and emotionally safe.
I feel like older people who say that identity is like some people say it's a myth, I think, or like it shouldn't be talked about. Um Honestly, I think it's stupid because they're like, "Oh, this is a new thing you young people came up with or whatever." That's how time works. Things evolve, cities evolve, languages evolve, living evolves. So coming up and saying, hey, this is who I am, these are the people I want to hang out with, this is who I see myself as, and this is what I believe in. There's nothing wrong with that. And I feel like there's also a sense of pride, overwhelming pride that older people have, where they just that I feel like older people feel like everyone should just fit into this little box and should just stay there and just like stay quiet, and you just stay there till you die. and and I just feel like that's a stupid way to live. It's a sad way to live, and it doesn't give your life purpose. If you don't feel happy being who you are, or doing what you want to do, or talking about what you want to accomplish, what's the point? I feel like some people have this overwhelming sense of pride. Like, I know a lot of straight people are like, why is a pride parade a thing? Where is straight pride? There is no such thing as straight pride. You don't get that because you have always been celebrated. You have always been able to walk down the street and just be like, oh, I'm straight. No one's gonna hate crime me. Same thing with like the Black Lives Matter movement and the Chicano movement and Stop Asian Hate movement. Like, white people have always been celebrated. So I feel like, because like as a white person, you can walk down the street, or a white passing person, you can walk down the street and not have to fear, being verbally abused or physically abused, sexually abused. It's ridiculous because people of other races get it way more than white people do. And I heard this thing about people believing in reverse racism. Reverse racism is not a thing. Like, you can't be racist to white people. Like, you can't, like, they've never been systematically oppressed. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like people who are inside of the box, like, how outside of the box has always been like a phrase. I feel like the people who have always been seen as normal or inside the box they have an overwhelming sense of pride, and they see other communities who are always seen as outside of the box, coming together, and they think it's not needed because they see it as tedious, or they see it as stupid, or like overdone. But I feel like having a community come together that's been marginalized and recognizing each other and where they come from and building a community on different kinds of people inside of that community is very much needed.
I do believe with identity, being celebrated for who you are is important, but until you can be who you are without feeling the need to come out or any way of just expressing that, you shouldn't have to openly say that. You could just be who you are. And until that happens, these issues of identity still need to be addressed.
If you want to see the works and the pieces of the artists that have been talking and creating on these topics and these problems, I would highly suggest you come to our show, listen to Our Cries on Friday, March 4th, 2022 at 6 p.m. The location is 2700 Arapahoe St, Denver, 80205. If you want to donate to PlatteForum, you can visit our website at platteforum.org. PlatteForum.org.